once upon a time, there wasn't any death. People had been created. And there just kept being more and more and more of them. And it kind of started to stink because there were so many people. They didn't have plumbing yet. They didn't have waste disposal yet. And imagine people living in communities, and more of them are coming. And it's getting smellier and stinkier all the time. And what a problem, you know. And this story comes from California people that lived in what we now call California. And the thing was that the people started fighting each other. They were like irritable and kind of angry and ornery with each other. And it was just kind of a mess, you know. And finally they had a chief, and he proposed this idea. He said, now a lot of spirits want to come into the world, but maybe those that have been here for a while should have to leave to make room for them. Maybe it would be a good idea that there be a limit on your length of stay here. Maybe that would be a good idea, and that would solve some of the problems that we're having. And so the people started fighting about that idea. Some of them liked it and some of them didn't, you know, and some said, well, maybe if we just changed our shapes every so often to eliminate boredom, that would be okay. But we don't want to have to leave. We want to stay as long as we wish. And finally Wiyad said, well, you guys can't agree on anything. Let's have a contest. Let's figure this out with a contest. And they liked that, you know, because in those days they liked contests. That was kind of a fun thing to do. And so they decided that the first, Wiyad got to pick the challenges, right? And they made teams. They had you can imagine it sort of relates to today, they had the pro-death and the anti-death teams. So the ones that were for it and the ones that were against it. And they chose up sides. And Wiyad picked the first contest. And it was going to be a race around the world. And the winner had to bring back something from each of the 4 directions, so that Wiyad knew that they'd been there. So they had to race around the world and bring back something. And both of the teams, now listen to this, both of the teams decided to cheat. How about that? Both of the teams decided to cheat. And so the ones that were in favor of death, they made a deal with the Mole Nation so that they could hide people in holes all around the earth. They'd have people hiding in holes. And the way that worked is that every so often a fresh runner would pop up out of a hole, you know, and appear to have gotten there all on their own. But really, it was a different runner all the way around the earth. And the anti-death team, they made a deal with the Eagle Nation so they could wear eagle feathers and go much faster. They fly around the earth, really. And now, the 4 directions, each direction watched this. They watched this and they gave the people gifts, but they didn't approve of it. They weren't happy about it. And they decided that some of those gifts were going to have consequences. And so the people that made the deal with the moles, they started getting stiffness in their joints. How about that? And those people that ran with the eagle feathers, they started developing painful knots all over their bodies where the eagle feathers had touched them. And so some of the people were in so much pain that they could hardly move. And there were no medicines invented yet to give them comfort. That comes later. And the summer weather was really hot, and they were very uncomfortable. And so illness had come into the world for the first time through the four directions who wanted there to be consequences for cheating in the race. And so the next challenge Wiat gave them was that they all had to go to where the sun sleeps at night and bring back a piece of the sun. Wow. And here's what happened. They cheated again. One of the teams made a deal with the sun. They sent a emissary to the east who could speak to the sun just before it rose and make a deal to get a piece of the sun without having to go to where it sleeps at night. And the other team, they got some of their members to starve themselves so that they would be light enough that they could just float up to where the sun was in the sky and get some of it, without having to go to where the sun sleeps at night. That's what they did. And imagine this. Both of them suffered because of this. So the ones that went east to get a piece of the sun, they didn't realize how heavy it was and how hot it was. And they came back with terrible back pain and burns all over them. And they were really hurting. And the ones that had floated up into the sky, well, they didn't realize that they would get so light that they would lose their minds, and they forgot where they were going. And they came back without minds. They came back kind of empty-headed. And that was a mess. Wow. And so Wiat came out with a final challenge. He said his final challenge was going to be, this was the final challenge. They would just have to fight it out hand to hand. And he invented wrestling for this final challenge. And he made a ring, just like in big time wrestling. And they got to pick teams, again, each group had a certain number of members to go into the ring to wrestle for them. And they cheated again. Isn't that terrible? They hid sharp objects and heavy implements on themselves, so that when they went into the ring, they all had weapons of mass destruction. And when the bell rang, or whatever Wiat did, when the eagle whistle blew, they just went at each other with their weapons, and they cut each other up, and they really hurt each other. Oh, you should have seen them. It was a draw. Every contest was a draw, and there they were lying on the ground suffering because they had deep gashes and wounds and terrible, broken bones, and there was no death. Nobody could die. They just lay there suffering. There was no medicine yet, so they couldn't get healed. There was no healing yet. None of these things had been invented. And so Wiat proposed to all of them. He said, let's be unanimous about this. Let's invite the spirit of death to come and take some of you who are suffering too much. And we'll make room for more to come. And part of this deal is we'll ask Creator to send medicine so that some of the suffering can be relieved. Some of your pain can be taken care of so that you don't have to die right away. But when it gets too bad, the spirit of death will be here to take you back. And they were hurting so much that they all agreed unanimously. Both teams agreed to that. And so that's how illness and death came into the world, according to Californians. So I just want to invite you now to wonder how whatever aches and pains you have came into your body. Maybe for a good reason. Maybe there's a spirit behind them that brought them here for a good reason. You never know until you ask. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go looking for the spirit that's behind whatever aches and pains or suffering you've had or have or are afraid of having. We're going to go look for a spirit who feeds those symptoms